Hello, my name is John Doherty. I'm from Ireland, living and working in Ireland and Spain. This is the first video podcast that I'm doing entitled Activist for a Better World. Like many people, because of the COVID 19 and the pandemic, it's invited me to reflect more on how the world is that I'm living in, and what do I feel about it, and what my response is to that. This isn't something new for me necessarily. I've been doing this most of my adult life. I think it's really important. I very much practice spirituality, and I don't feel you can be spiritually and not moved by some of the injustice that we see around us. So recently I've been watching a lot of Netflix again because of the COVID in our lockdown. Shows on the most wanted people in the world, narcos in Mexico, mafias in Italy, Russia, and so on. But really struck by, there was a show recently here in Spain called La Linea, which is kind of like the town which is closest to in southern Spain, which is closest to Gibraltar, where all the traffickers come in with their boats of hashish and tobacco and drugs from Gibraltar into Spain, and then from Spain into Europe. So that town has become a portal for drug trafficking, and has been for many years. And I was really moved by the mayor of the town saying, look, we don't have the resources to deal with this. The Spanish government isn't giving us the money and the manpower to actually stop what's happening. And the people in the town protesting, all the time around that, not being heard from the central government. And let's be honest, Spain is politically a bit of a mess in that regard. So I could really feel the mayor's pain, and how the town had suffered. Tourists don't want to go there anymore, obviously. And then the local criminal element make all the money. They make all the money from this, and they make huge amounts of money, which they can use to bribe who they need. And also, crime is like a cancer. It just basically affects the fear it creates, is very negative for the community. Young people just get sucked up into it. They see it often as their only way to make a livelihood. And so it really creates a negative impact on the whole town. And so my first response to that was, having spent many years working and studying and being personally involved in the area of addiction and drug addiction, alcohol addiction, whatever. My first response is, how can we change the context? What needs to change? If they got more money from Madrid for resources, would that make any difference? If they had more police, if they had more resources? And, looking at Netflix about, there's a documentary on Mexico and the cartels, and the Mexican president, the recent Mexican president, crying, basically saying to the people, the war on drugs is over. The war on drugs is now over because it's killed too many people. It's killed too many people, and it hasn't worked. It just hasn't worked. So, and that's not an isolated response. I mean, any of the things, the research that I've read on the response to drugs is that the war on drugs, and even the name war on, hasn't worked. It does not work. Some people say, oh, well, it limits the supply. It doesn't. It doesn't limit anything. Criminals find other ways to coerce, to kill, to manipulate, to bribe their way into providing drugs everywhere. It's now a global epidemic. And so, therefore, this is a little bit radical now. We need a radical solution to something like that. If our current response isn't working, there has to be another response that may work, So, and as we reflect on it, thinking, well, giving the money to the criminal element in the town in La Linea, which has probably the lowest moral, ethical standing in the town. I mean, they kill people, they manipulate people, they extort, they traffic and so on. Giving them that huge power and money is not a good thing to do. I mean, it's crazy, actually. It's absolutely fucking crazy. Excuse my language, but it is. It's crazy. So what can we do to change the context? We can't get rid of, let's say we can't get rid of the drugs. Just like alcohol. We can't get rid of alcohol. We can't get rid of drugs. We can't get rid of, and that's another video that I might do, is people's, why people take these kind of things. But the demand is there. So if the demand is there, and obviously it creates its own demand through addiction, but if the demand is there, then what can we do? How do we change the context? And that requires radical thinking. You can't just say, oh, well, let's get more money, let's get more police, let's stop them coming in. It hasn't worked. It doesn't work. I want to take the power away from the criminal element. I want to take the money away from them, So really, the whole thing around drugs and smuggling and so on and trafficking, criminality is a social issue. It's a social issue, really. For too long now, all the money and the resources has gone into policing, which hasn't worked. And not enough has gone into looking at how do we change the context, So what would be a radical solution? Let's decriminalize as opposed to legalize. Very different words, very different responses. Let's make that clear. Let's decriminalize drugs, all of them. Let's decriminalize prostitution, all of it. Let's decriminalize everything. Let's decriminalize it. And let's put it in the right context. Let's put it in the right context. So drugs, for example, when people have addiction to drugs and they're hooked on drugs, they need medical support. They need psychological support. They need treatment. They need safe spaces to use drugs. They need to be given drugs that are clean, that have been manufactured by the government, that are mixed full of things that are going to kill them. So let's create these kind of places in our society. Let's acknowledge what's already here and then create safe legislation around that, where we say, okay, we're going to decriminalize all drugs. And if people want to use them for recreation, that's fine if they're adults and they're getting their drugs from the pharmacy where we get all our medication, which means that it's taxed and it's a commercial company is actually producing them like a pharmaceutical company, right? And therefore proper studies can be done. And therefore, health centers can be created around the whole area of recreational drugs, which people are going to take anyway and have been doing for hundreds of years. Now, that's an adult response. That's a mature response to the situation. And then obviously, there's nothing wrong with recreational drugs, just like there's nothing wrong with alcohol use. As long as everything is done sensibly, as long as the product is regulated. You see, that's it. So all of a sudden, all the money is taken away from crime, put back into society where it's taxed and businesses make the money, and all of a sudden there's a lot more money available to the town. A lot more money for those people who are most vulnerable around situation. And they're not the recreational drug users or people who go for a drink in the pub. No, they are the people who form an addiction. to the drugs. They're the ones who need the most support. They're the most vulnerable. And then that's where that money can go, to supporting them in their addiction, with their addiction. And that's really, really an area that nobody wants to know about, really. We use terrible terms to describe people with addiction. They're just a junkie, they're a drug addict, they're, whatever, they're just an alcoholic. What can be done? Nothing. Goodbye. They are the most vulnerable people in our society. And if we change the context around our whole approach to drugs, we would take the money away from crime, and we will be able to invest that money with the most vulnerable people that it affects. But nobody seems to be brave enough or smart enough, or there just doesn't seem to be, I don't know what it is, enough anger for people or thinking for people to actually make that change. And this is the activist coming out of me now, so I apologize. But I'm really, really pissed off about this. I really am. I want to see a change, a complete sea change worldwide around drug approach. I really do. Legislate, decriminalize all recreational drugs, no matter what they are. That's what we need to do. I want to be able to go into a pharmacy, if necessary, and I can get opium, I can get MDMA, I can get LSD, I can get cocaine, and I know that the product has been regulated and it's relatively safe from that point of view. I can talk to my GP about it. I can talk to my pharmacist about it. And as a mature adult, I can decide how I want to take that or not. Because there's plenty of education. It's an open society. And, all of a sudden we're lifting up the lid on the whole thing. And people go, oh gosh, that's terrible. If we decriminalize, and I'm not saying, if we decriminalize drugs, everybody's going to be taking it. I mean, the same with alcohol. It's the same with alcohol. It's a huge drug. It's a huge drug. More people die from alcohol probably than drug abuse. In general, more people. So hear that, but we accept it because we recognize, hold on, prohibition doesn't work. Prohibition doesn't work, but for some reason there's a fear around drugs as opposed to alcohol. Alcohol's okay, it's not a drug, it's a food and beverage. It's a food and beverage, we regulate it, we tax it, commercial companies produce it, we can go out and enjoy a drink with our friends, and of course, there will be some people who become alcoholics, and they're the most vulnerable, but we have money to look after them because of all the money we take in taxes and all the money we get from commercially producing it. And it's relatively safe for most people because we make sure it is, we have limits on it and so on. And everybody seems to be happy. And you know what? Nobody in the criminal world makes any money from selling alcohol. Nobody. And so we have less deaths, we have less trafficking, we have less crime, we have less criminals. Wonderful. It worked. It works. It works to a large degree. It works to a large degree. So let's do it for drugs. All of them. All of them. I think it's really, really, absolutely has to change. It has to change. And unfortunately, nobody seems to have the political will to make it change. And yet billions and billions and billions of euros are made every year through illegal drug trade, And that feeds a whole monster of criminality around trafficking people as well, around bribery, around manipulation, around debt. I mean, it just gives way too much power to the dark side of life. Way too much power to people who have no ethical, moral fibre whatsoever, and who are a cancer ultimately on society, really. Are cancer on society. These people need to be disempowered, the money and the power taken away from them, and trying to respond to that purely from a legal perspective is absolutely not working. It has never worked. It has never worked. Show me where it's worked. I don't see it, and I've looked all around the place. I've researched a lot. So, thank you for listening. This is my first Activism for a Better World podcast. If you'd like to comment, I'm always interested in respectful, thoughtful, reflective comments. Thank you very much. Okay.